then Colette, can you just check the YouTube? Okay, I think.
Justin, are
Fingers
you
crossed.
able to hear me? Justin?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Hey, you had asked about additions to the agenda. I had just emailed you that thing that I had gotten from one of those Northern League schools about maybe looking at the possibility of adjusting quarterfinals to having home site hosting those. Would that
Yep,
be?
and that's not.
Would
And
that be?
I think I responded. That's not a committee decision. So CHSAA sets locations and dates. So that would not be a discussion item for this committee. But as I mentioned, 4A already is the home sites. But again, not that would not be.
So is that just a 5A one then?
Correct. Yes.
So where would that go if those folks wanted to change it, since it's not something that we deal with here?
They could bring it up to me. I can in the CHSAA update. I'm happy to discuss some of the reasoning behind it, but they would need to talk to me. But I can tell you it's not going to change.
Well,
And I
I
can
think
discuss
maybe they
that.
were hoping that eventually it would change, and their only thought reasoning was that there's a lot of those northern schools that end up in those quarterfinals, and they just thought the environment would be better and probably the gate take would be better if you did them that quarterfinal at home sites. But
Sure. Yeah, and I can again, I'll discuss that in the CHSAA update. But they can, if they have questions, they can reach out to me, and I can discuss with them. And a couple of
that's not a
northern
soccer
ADs did reach
committee.
out.
That's not a soccer committee
No,
choice.
no.
So that's like a
CHSAA is
legislative council sort of situation.
No, that's just a CHSAA sets dates and locations.
Oh, so they're the ones that choose, like 4A just has semifinal hosts, but 5A has quarterfinal.
Yeah, CHSAA makes that decision.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and get this recording going on the computer, but we should be live now on YouTube. And then Mike, as soon as I get the recording going, I'll just shoot right over to you. All right, so welcome everyone. Everyone, the live stream should be up and going on YouTube. I want to welcome everyone to the soccer committee meeting, 2023 soccer committee meeting. Pleased to be joined by our committee members, as well as some of our guests from HSSO and CHSAA. This time, we'll just go ahead and get right into the meeting. And Mike, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Mike Lovinguth of Arupe Jesuit, who is our committee chair. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin. Mike Lovinguth, Arupe Jesuit, assistant principal. So want to thank all our committee members and Justin for putting this together today. Got some good topics to talk about. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and then we'll start off with just a quick rundown of who's on the call today, and we'll just go straight down the soccer committee meeting agenda. So Cyrus, if you want to introduce yourself first.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Cyrus Salahi. I'm the men's varsity soccer coach over at Liberty Common High School.
Thank you. Ty?
Yeah, Ty Gordon, Frederick High School, athletic director and assistant principal.
John?
John Schub, Doherty High School, athletic director, business manager, assistant principal.
Josh?
Josh King, Central High School out here in Grand Junction, athletic director, assistant principal.
Veronica?
Veronica Marcello, Denver South High School girls soccer coach.
And then Ken?
Ken here, president of high school soccer officials.
And Sean?
Sean Stediford, CHSAA soccer president and girls soccer coach at Colorado Academy.
Thank you, everyone. I think we'll move on now.
Did you get a chance did Josh introduce himself?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
And then, Megan is not with us this morning, but she was also on the committee. So at this point, we'll move on to 3.0, which is to review last year's soccer committee minutes. And I believe those have been emailed to everybody. So if you'll take a moment to review those minutes, and when everybody is ready, I will call for a motion to accept those. And I think the main change from last year was the elimination of overtime during the regular season. I'm not sure if we need to bring that up on the live stream, but just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
No, we would just need a motion to approve those minutes if once everyone feels comfortable and they've had a chance, we just need a motion, a second, and then an all in favor.
Motion to accept the minutes from our previous soccer committee meeting on November 30th, 2023.
All right, it's John Shube.
Second from Ty Gordon.
Great. So it's been motioned and seconded. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Approved. Great. Are there any additions to the agenda?
So I do, as we mentioned before we came on here, there is one. It's not really an addition, but it's going to be an addition to a vote by this committee, which will be 8.2, which everyone did see was on the agenda. It went out to everybody. Originally, 8.2, which is the expansion of the 2A postseason bracket, was to be a discussion item for possible implementation in 26-28. We did receive feedback from 2A administrators. Survey was sent out. We got just under 40 responses. 74% of those responses came back in favor of an immediate 24-26 expansion to the 2A postseason bracket. And so this committee will discuss and then ultimately decide whether or not to put forward a proposal to increase the 2A postseason bracket beginning in the 24-26 cycle. So that is an addition to the agenda in just in voting, but everyone should have already been aware of that discussion point previous on the agenda. So.
Hey, Mike, I had one other thing. I had some coaches that reached out. They were just curious if at some point we could pull data and send out data on the effects of removing overtime, essentially what we approved last year, to kind of catch up with the NCAA. And so I just want to add that in there if it's possible to get that information and then get that out to the association at some point so they can have a chance to peek at it.
Yeah, Justin, I assume that would be something that you guys would do. Is that something that's
Josh, specifically what? So you just want data? What data specifically were you looking for?
I think they were just interested to two things really: how much ties would or would not have affected overall, seating in the seating index. I think that was the real one. I know when we looked at data last year, it was a very minimal number of games that went to overtime that then were changed in overtime, which is one reason with the data why we thought it would be okay to remove it. I think just backing that up with some data from the team, like, hey, if your team finished with 3 ties, if those were all wins, here's where they would have been. If those were all losses, here's where they would have maybe ended up. Not that we can do that for everyone, but I think just the impact of taking overtime out of the regular season, I think if we could get some data, that'd be cool.
Okay, I'll just put elimination of overtime data, 8.4, and then when we get to that point, yeah, we can discuss further and try to get some specifics on exactly what coaches are looking at, what data they'd like. Yeah, no problem.
Any other additions? Great, then I think we will move on to 5.0, CHSAA report. Justin?
Thank you, Mike. And again, I mentioned earlier, I will try to keep this brief. We do have now quite a few agenda items that we will be discussing, so I don't want to take up a whole lot of time here. And if anyone on the committee does have any follow-up questions, I'll be happy to answer those. So the big updates I think that I've got are coming from postseasons from boys and girls this year in the fall. And girls in the spring. And the good news that I have to report is that ticket sales for postseason games is up. And in the case of this past fall for the boys, it was up significantly, which is great. Girls, I will say girls postseason has always been strong attendance wise. And so we've stayed steady there, which is great. We'd love to see growth. We're hoping for growth, but the girls postseason attendance venues for semifinals, finals has remained strong, has been strong for years, and has just kind of continued that momentum. But we were up almost actually a little bit over 1,300 ticket sales in 5A alone for quarterfinals and semifinals in this in the fall here. So that was phenomenal news. Very, very important because, as all of you know, at schools, costs have gone up significantly. And so venue costs, cost of just providing workers, whether it's ticket people, security, all of those costs have gone up. In the case of venues, costs have actually doubled from in just like a 3 to 4 year period for our venue costs. So it's not getting cheaper. But luckily our ticket sales have been strong. They've been up in some cases. I will say that we are looking, we've looked at ticket prices. There's been some small increases. We've tried to minimize those increases in ticket sales as much as possible. We've looked at other states, and I can tell you that we are either on par or below what we are charging for tickets compared to comparable states. Colorado is one of the more expensive states, as many of you know, to live in, and inflation is certainly run its toll here, and so the costs are high, but we are trying to reduce that, minimize those costs, and not put them on the consumer. And so the ticket sales have the increase in those ticket sales. We've tried to keep those down as much as possible. Josh had brought up, some of you may have gotten just the beginning as you came on the YouTube live there. He had asked a question about the quarterfinal dates and locations. Again, those dates and locations are set by CHSAA, so it would not be a committee decision. I will say that I've spoken to some Northern Leagues administrators. Front Range League reached out to me. We had a very good phone conversation just to let them know that right now, again, I'd mentioned the fact that that venue costs are going up. The quarterfinals, since we made the change, since CHSAA made the change to neutral site quarterfinals, the revenue produced on that game has gone up over 5 times the amount. And so it's a very, very important round of the postseason in being able to cover costs, because it's a very, very thin margin. And everyone keeps saying, oh, we'll make more money. Not even close. And when I say not close at all. 5 times the amount of revenue generated by the neutral site location for both girls and boys 5A quarterfinals. And then, as I'd mentioned, 2A, 3A, 4A, those are still at the home sites. Obviously, there is quite a bit of travel involved with 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A, all along the I-25 corridor. We have no schools outside the I-25 corridor there. And so that is an opportunity to generate some revenue to pay for facilities that I can tell you right now, we don't make the money to pay for those facilities based on that game alone. It's typically a loss. And so we do rely on other games and earlier rounds and to produce some of that revenue that does pay for championship level venues that create, lasting memories for our student athletes to be able to play in professional sports stadiums for state championships. So that's the reasoning behind that, Josh. Just wanted to clarify that. And then obviously we are excited about the upcoming 24-26 cycle. We will be finishing the last season here in girls 2024. We'll close out the 22-24 cycle. We are very excited about 24-26. It will see the most boys and girls soccer teams that we've ever had in CHSAA. It seems like every time a new school comes on board, that soccer is a sport that they're looking to add. Girls soccer in particular seems to be very popular. And as CHSAA adds new member schools, soccer seems to be that sport, along with like basketball and volleyball, that they're always adding. So we're going to have the most schools that we've ever had. I can give you the breakdown, but boys soccer will see 58 schools in the 24-26 cycle, 4A boys 60, 3A boys 56, 2A boys 53. That number 53, again, highest we've ever had in 2A, and that goes to a lot of new schools coming on board as members, adding schools, and then just the expansion of soccer. The distribution of the classifications is going to add to 2A and 5A, those bottom and top tiers classifications will add programs. Girls will have 53 at the 5A classification, 62 4A, 63 3A, and 62A schools for girls moving into the next cycle, which is incredible. That's what we're looking to do. I would say that Colorado, the strength of our boys and girls soccer programs is as good as anywhere in the country based on numbers. And we're looking to build on that and grow. And obviously we're very excited about the direction that it's going currently. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Red card reports, red card numbers are up a little bit. And it seems to be that the increase in red cards is coming a lot from dissent towards the official. So whether it's profanity or dissent towards official, those numbers are going up, and we're trying. We really are stressing sportsmanship. It is a priority, with CHSAA and interscholastic athletics as a whole. And so to see those numbers increase on red cards and increase with dissent, it's something that I don't know if the committee has some suggestions. I'd like people to start putting that at the top of their minds on what we need to do. We had several situations this year. I want to say it was 4 or 5 that I know about, where we had to clear the bleachers because of the fans. And so those are things that we want to eliminate. Again, sportsmanship is the priority. And so if this committee and those of you watching, administrators back at your individual schools, have some suggestions and ideas, but we did see an increase in situations of red cards, of having to clear stands because of fan behavior. And that's something that we do, again, want to be able to get under control. And we don't want to see that happen in any form or fashion. So that's all I've got. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions from the committee for Justin? Great, thanks, Justin. Seeing none, I think we will move along. So Ken, with the officials report, thank you so much.
Well, good morning, everyone. Quick update from the referee or official side of things. We finished the year strong, so we have some good news to report. We ended up the year with 372 registered officials, which is an increase of about 65 from last year. So really a kind of a tale of two halves. The spring season, I think there was a lot of uncovered games. We picked up a lot of officials over the summer. So for the boys season, I think there were very few varsity games went 2-man. So our coverage was actually pretty good in the fall. Tuesdays and Thursdays continue to be a problem because that's when the majority of games are being scheduled. So sometimes a Tuesday has 5 times the number of games that are scheduled on a Monday. So it doesn't, if we could spread that out a bit more evenly. I know everyone wants to play on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but trust me, if you schedule a game on a Monday or a Wednesday, you will get a much stronger referee crew because there's much fewer games and the better officials get prioritized. Speaking of that, we did, of the new members we picked up, we were fortunate to recruit a bunch of younger referees from the USSF side of the game. We were also fortunate to pick up some high-level college referees who moved into the state. And I'm not sure if everyone knows, but we actually have a FIFA World Cup referee refereeing games in Northern Colorado. Brooke Mayo was the assistant referee in the Women's World Cup final in Australia. She did a bunch of games this year, including the 3A semi-final up at UNC. So we have recruited a FIFA referee in our ranks. So if you're speaking to your football colleagues, ask them when the Super Bowl referee is going to come and referee a high school game in Colorado. Last thing for us, and I know this might come up later, the referees love no overtime. So we're big fans of that. And just a personal observation, because there's no overtime, I have noticed just a big increase in intensity the last 10 minutes of games that are tied. People are going for the winner, or one team's going for the winner and the other team's trying to shut up shop. So personally, I think the no overtime is a good thing, not just because I don't have to work the overtime, but the last 10 minutes gets really exciting in these games. So any questions on the referee side?
Ken, are there opportunities for those USF rep, or I'm sorry, those college refs and Brett to kind of work with other referees in the state and kind of learn from each other?
Very much so. And we actively try and put some newer referees with the experienced college referees. We don't have any problem getting people to work with Brooke because everyone wants to work with a FIFA referee. And she is great in passing on tips, and she's an assistant referee at the FIFA level. But one thing she loves about doing high school soccer in Colorado, she can be the center referee as well. She's not allowed to wear her FIFA badge unless she is the assistant referee. So if she's the center, she can't wear her FIFA badge. But if she's an assistant referee in one of your games, she can wear her FIFA badge.
Great. Sorry,
yeah, and just on the college referee side, as an example, the 3A, 4A, 5A finals, boys finals we just had, all 12 officials on those 3 games were college referees. The average age of the 5A final was 27, and the average age of the 4A final was 25. So we're getting the younger high-level referees coming to do high school and enjoying it and adding value.
And not only that, but we had that 5A crew. A lot of those guys had to change flight arrangements around because they were working MLS Next. Isn't that correct?
Down in Tucson, they were going to a big college tournament in Tucson.
Yeah, so yeah, we're fortunate to be able to have NCAA officials working at our level, and obviously I was fortunate enough to be at the 3A semifinals at UNC Greeley and got to see Brooke work in person, and yeah, she's as good as advertised for sure.
Great. Any other questions for Ken? Well, thank you so much, Ken. Good luck with the winter recruiting.
Yeah. Well, we have more lined up. We have a bunch lined up for the spring.
Then we will move forward. 7.0, Sean with the Coaches Association report.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. I'm jealous because I think my part's going to go a little longer than Ken's. Just a couple quick things. Our membership and participation this fall was the most that we have seen across the board in probably the last 4 years in regards to participation in the All-State voting and United Soccer Coaches voting for end of season awards. That was really nice to see. We had a really big jump from the 4A and 5A coaches, especially this year. And I think we're still going to acknowledge that All-State is not a perfect process, but it is improving, and I think we are gathering the right players. There were fewer coaches this year who went on and voted for their specific players and players from their leagues. So it was nice to see that we were kind of representing and putting forth the right players from different leagues and different teams to be represented for All-State and for our national awards with the United Soccer Coaches Association, organization, excuse me. Let's see. One of the things that came up from the RPI is there was a lot of positive feedback that I sent from coaches. I think the right teams are being gathered. There are still a few coaches out there who would like to see a human element come back into the seating. And I don't know how that can be done. There were a couple suggestions of maybe having a non-biased group watch different classifications and kind of see what comes up. But I think in general, a lot more coaches are coming around to the idea that this is the formula we're going to use, and this is how you've got to kind of not work it, but look at it to get into the playoffs. Next thing, this was kind of a talking point, and having been one of the referees that got or someone who got recruited into the refereeing this year, there's a lot of coaches that are kind of getting frustrated with fields, especially at public stadiums and maybe public parks, where the goals are not necessarily in line with the end lines, or there's no corner flags. And some coaches are wondering if there was something CHSAA could do when the feedback comes in. Because from an official standpoint, all we do is we report it, and there are some coaches out there that would like the games to be called off and canceled if the field is not playable, which I don't think is the right option. But it seems to be more and more coming up. And I know some teams are at the mercy of, if they play at a public park, if the field will be lined, if it has corner flags, do they need to bring corner flags? The public stadiums, a lot of them share football and boys soccer in the fall. And sometimes if you look, there's a 2 to 3 inch gap between the goalposts for the soccer field, and then the uprights for the football field are actually on the goal line. The soccer goals are actually not. So just something to think about. I don't know, Justin, if that's what CHSAA has to come and report to those schools, but it's just something that came up this fall. So, and then let's see. A lot of coaches appreciated the adjustment, the timing of the games for the playoffs. Feedback from Greeley. Greeley has a nice field, but it's really not fun to get to. So if 3A in particular could move to a different semifinal site, that would be appreciated. And coming back to overtime, I think a lot more coaches are coming around to the idea of eliminating overtime, but there are still some out there that feel like we need to have a little bit more. And I know it's been put on the agenda at 8.4, but they would like to see the data surrounding it. Those were the main talking points from the Coaches Association this time.
And Sean, I can definitely touch, if there's any questions for Sean, please go first. And if not, then I always love to touch on some of the questions and concerns from coaches. So I can touch on each one of those if there's no questions for Sean.
Anyone have any questions before Justin? I think you're good to go, Justin.
Perfect. So yeah, so Sean, and I feel like sometimes there's a lot of the same questions that come up from coaches every year. The RPI format, the seating format, I would be in agreement. You know, I've been around 15 years. I remember I've been on the seating committee for soccer since 2008, long before I got to CHSAA. When I was physically sitting in a room, there were no rankings, and we were literally going through and picking schools with the human element. So I appreciate the human element. I just have to remind coaches that the seating process with CHSAA is uniform for all sports. It's not just a soccer. So any change that would be made would have to be made across the board on how we capture the brackets. And so while I definitely would be a human element supporter, it's not my decision. And so the board of directors and membership of CHSAA prefers and is voted and passed the CHSAA selection and seating index, which is 50% RPI, 50% max preps. And I would say that if anybody has any ideas or questions or concerns, Ryan Casey in our office is our data specialist, and he's the one that kind of goes through and creates some of this. And my recommendation would be to start a discussion with Ryan, and then hopefully, eventually maybe with some numbers and some data and some brainstorming, that if there's an idea that's better, hey, love to, always want better methods. So if they can create one, would be happy to work with the coach and with Ryan to maybe get them together and think up some great ideas. So that's always want to remind people, it's not just soccer. We couldn't just say soccer only is going to have this, this group of people that goes out and evaluates and ranks teams. because it has to be across the board for all sports. Fields. So I will say that with fields, obviously, we've got schools in very large school districts with big stadiums. We've got smaller schools that play in parks, and obviously, you know, the expectation and there's obviously minimum requirements through the NFHS for field size. And if if an official and an administrator don't feel like the venue is safe, then games should not happen on there. And so the discretion of the game administrator and the official on whether or not that is a safe playing field would be determined. And if they feel like it is, then the game obviously would be played. And there's going to be schools that play on smaller fields. There's going to be schools that are games that are played on larger fields. Some are going to be on grass. Some are going to be on turf. It just depends. But some might have corner flags. Some might not have corner flags. But at the end of the day, safety is number one. And if the field is legal in size and meets the requirements and is safe, then the game will be played. So that's just what I always tell coaches. I know there might be some fields where the grass is a little bit shorter, a little bit higher. There might be a little bit of a slope on some fields if it's grass, but if it's safe, then we would play. So glad to hear, Sean, you and I had spoken on the playoff timing. Definitely listened. We moved those times up. I think that was a great change. You know, we had gone to moving some times back just because we wanted to give later, because we wanted to give spectators an opportunity. I think now we've seen since COVID working, you know, families' professional schedules have changed just a little bit. And so that 5 and 7:30 time is maybe a little bit more convenient now than maybe it wasn't in the past. Traffic has lightened up a little bit. You know, it's not, there's more work from home options and stuff. So 5 and 7:30 seem to work really well. And I see no reason to go away from that. I think it's been a great adjustment. I will say with venue location, Sean, you know, while Greeley may have been difficult for CA, let's remember Frontier Academy was 1 goal away from being in the 3A semifinals as well. And that's about 2 minutes from Frontier Academy. So, you know, we could never, you know, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know who's going to advance to the semifinals, but I will say that when we do look at venue locations, we look to spread those out across the state. I have to remind people sometimes Greeley is in Colorado. Colorado Springs is in Colorado. I know it's not always just Denver. 2A girls semifinals, we've played in Gunnison. We're looking at, I'll just tell you right now, we are looking to go back to Gunnison for that 2A semifinal on the girls side in the spring, because we do want to spread the love. I'd say soccer does as well of a job as any sport. We have Gunnison, we have Lakewood, we have Denver, we have Greeley, we have Colorado Springs, all as locations across the state. We have schools north and south and west and east and centrally located. And so we do try to make sure that we do give an opportunity to those locations. And we obviously love to have a situation where we get 4 schools that are right across the street. It's not always possible. And those, I will say too, that those contracts are signed. And this is what people don't seem to realize. The contracts are signed and payments are made months in advance. I mean, those contracts are done in August for a game that'll be played in November. And so, you know, someone says, well, Coleridge and Rifle are playing in the semifinal. Why don't we play it on the Western Slope? Well, obviously, had we have known that 5 months earlier, maybe we would have scheduled it out there. And we do try to move things around. And we, you know, again, I mentioned Gunnison as a location, and we continue to look at all locations, and I'm happy to take suggestions. And if people want to reach out, and we do look at numbers, and I mentioned ticket sales, and we look at all those things when deciding where to play games. And if you remember, 3A in 2022 was played in Lakewood, and in 2023 it was played in Greeley. And so we'll continue to try to move games around and see where the shoe fits, and try to make the locations again across the state so everyone feels like they're represented. We want to find the highest quality. The field at UNC Greeley was of the highest quality. I can say that. It's a beautiful.
And all the coaches agreed with that. And I wasn't trying to put it forward.
No, I know.
As a discomfort from Colorado Academy. It would just, there's hard to get to. That's all.
No, for sure. And if you were, you know, if you were Frontier Academy and the game was at Lakewood, it would be hard for them to get to that too. And so I do remind everybody that we do have schools all across this state, and we do try to, again, I don't have the crystal ball, but we do try to make sure that we do have venues that do represent Colorado as a whole as best as we can. And we'll continue to look at those locations, but we do want to provide first-class facilities for those games, and try to make the experience as high quality as possible as well. Overtime, I think we'll get. It was the last one that you touched on was overtime.
Yeah, but real quick, would CHSAA ever consider Lakewood Memorial instead of Trailblazer? As
So
Lakewood
again,
Memorial
it kind
is
of
a-
goes. So I will say Trailblazer is they are scheduled for a replacement, turf replacement.
Okay.
There, and it
That
does
was
go to
some of the coaches just said it feels like the turf is old, and Lake Memorial is a soccer stadium.
Yep.
So,
Again, yeah, and it does go to availability on that
Sure.
too. And you got to remember, soccer, football, sorry, that's happening as well, and practices and those types of things. And so, but Trailblazer is scheduled for a turf replacement, which we're excited about. And I love the venue. It's renovated. Once they get that turf in there, it'll be great. Parking's great. Size is amazing. They've got a great crew there. It is used as the home site for Division II NCAA team, and so once that new turf goes in, I think it might be one of the best facilities we've got in the area too. So
cool. And then overtime was the last one. And like I said,
overtime.
More coaches are coming around.
Yeah, let's wait to 8.4. I think we've got some discussion on that there. That's all I've got, Mike.
Great. Any other questions for Sean? Coach, thanks so much. All right, moving into the action items for today. We will start off with a proposal from the Frontier League. And this is mimics some other sports in CHSAA, so for an individual player, game minimum requirements for postseason eligibility. Justin, I know you had sent out wording of that. Do you want me to pull that up and read it?
No, I have it right in front of me. I'm happy to read that, and I can just give you a little. Yep, I can give you a little background because obviously, we get these questions and concerns, and Sean, I'd love to get the Coaches Association's take on this as well. We do get concerns from administration, from coaches. Recently, this 3, 4, 5 years ago, this wasn't really an issue, but we've seen more and more now, whether it's MLS Next or some of these club programs, specifically in the metro area. I hate to say it, is where a lot of these teams are, where they now have athletes that are playing not for the high school, but playing MLS Next or playing with their club programs. And then at the end of seasons, without playing any or maybe 1 or 2 games throughout a season, joining postseason play. And it really just, I think, takes away from the experience of the high school. It really adds a different element. According to coaches, this is, again, I'm just regurgitating some of the information that I've gotten from them. And so they wanted to see something happen. And so the Frontier League did have a proposal together because I think it did impact some of their teams directly. And so they do know, as Mike mentioned, we do have minimums in ice hockey, in tennis, in boys and girls tennis, ice hockey, boys and girls swimming, all have minimum number of participation that's required from individuals to be eligible for the postseason. And so they're looking at something similar for soccer. The wording on the proposal would be that athletes must be eligible on the roster, in uniform, and on the bench for both halves to meet the CHSAA game per athlete minimum game requirement to compete in the playoffs. This would include goalies and backup goalies and any players on the bench. So again, the questions came from coaches and from administrators. Well, if I have a kid that doesn't get in the game, will they be punished for that and then not be able to participate in the postseason? No, we're not telling a kid that if you're on the bench, that would count per this wording. JV games. Question came up, do JV games count? Yes, JV games would count. This committee will need to discuss whether or not you would have a different number. So let's just say minimum 10 varsity games, and then a combination of 15 JV and varsity, or however that's going to look. Ice hockey, we do have the wording because there are some players that just play at the JV level, and oftentimes there's not 15 JV games for those kids, and you've got those JV call-ups. So what ice hockey has is that if a student is just a JV player only, so you have someone on your team who's just only played JV games throughout the year, or maybe just JV and a handful of varsity, that as long as they have participated in 65% of those lower level games, and that 65% is the same percent of, so the game minimum in ice hockey is 13, 19 games, it's 65%. So they've said if you've participated in 65% and you are a JV only player and you do not play club hockey, in this case, club soccer, then you would also be postseason eligible. And there would be a waiver process for, injuries, illness, and some of those unique situations. But then obviously you would not be able to submit a waiver for a kid that's a club player and is missing games because of their club participation. So that's the proposal. And then I'll turn it over to this committee for discussion.
You guys
Can
jump
you-
shoot.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, can we elaborate more on why this is being brought up? Is it like an equity issue that people feel it's unfair to bring in players to the postseason, or what's the reasoning behind it?
Yes, and any of these committee members that have talked to their leagues or spoken to can certainly chime in. But yes, I believe that the reasoning would be that they feel like it is, I guess we can just say unfair that you have athletes that are coming in that have no participation with the team whatsoever and are just coming in essentially as a player that would help that team in the postseason. That's the feedback that I've gotten, Brian.
I would think that CHSAA would have some sort of interest in having their postseason reflect their regular season in order to have kind of both of those things have some faithfulness and some fidelity to them. You certainly don't want, you don't want your postseason seeming crazily off from your regular season, or else that kind of devalues, I think, that a little bit.
So I guess my thought process when I first read this is what you just said, Mike. But then I think that I wonder how many kids this is affecting, and if it's about equity, like these teams have one more really good player, when there's schools that have much more affluent populations, that have like indoor fields when it snows, or can get their whole team plays club because they're in an affluent neighborhood. So I guess my question more, like, I want to make sure that this isn't about like people upset that school from a poor neighborhood had like one or two kids who play at an elite level who came in and helped their team. When I think inequities happen across Colorado, I know like schools have indoor training facilities, and a lot of schools when it snows have to try to find gym space, or schools have people that they can bring onto their school through scholarship and really amp up their team. So my question would be, how are those things different and making it fair for then a kid who came to one or two games and then wants to help their team, but the rules of MLS Next essentially are prohibiting them from doing that? And is it punishing the kid, or is that something that CHSAA could talk to the club about doing? Because I believe ECNL and GA all allow their kids to play club or play high school sports, and it's just MLS Next that we're specifically talking about.
Yeah, Veronica, I think from Colorado Springs Metro League, talking to some of my coaches, they asked if this is a knee-jerk reaction for this year specifically due to the MLS Next, right? And if there is data that supports us doing this as we move forward, right? And so a few of my coaches asked, what does the data look like for this? How many teams are impacted by this? Are we trying to legislate a few that will impact many, or what is happening there for that piece?
Can I chime in from the coaches?
Yeah, and I think part of the issue too is not just an equity as far as having indoor. It's an unintended consequence of talking to a coach a few years ago, of telling the rest of your 18 boys on the roster, 18 girls, hey, we'll ride with you until we get the better players for the playoffs. That is a message that you just sent as well, that this player is choosing to not play with this team because they would prefer to play with the better team. And then these 18 girls or guys that finished 10-5, hey, or 9 and whatever, you make the playoffs, great. Now the cavalry's here and someone just lost their starting job that they worked for the whole year. And to the other teams, again, talking to a coach a few years ago, who there were two MLS Next boys that joined another Fort Collins team just for playoffs. And I coached some of those other boys on that team on my ECNL team. And it's a, hey, what message did that send me? It's not fair to the team we have to play, that now all of a sudden we're playing a complete different roster with a new 11 and a new 9 or whoever. So I think that's part of the argument too, not so much equity. It's what messages are we giving the other teams and the other players that, hey, we'll use high school just to rig the system for playoffs when they showed up for one game out of 15.
Yeah, I just think I think that puts a lot on the boys. So like if I have a choice to play MSL Next and this is like my one option to go and they're not allowing me to play high school sports, that's more on like the club culture than the kid. And I would also say like you can think of it as a way like the kids would think they're taking their spot, but I would also argue that collectively teams are excited to be in playoffs, and a lot of kids will recognize like this is a team effort to get there, and I helped my team to reach this spot. And then we had a little push to get there. But I think it goes back to what was said earlier, like how many kids are being affected by this, and when did this, like, has this been talked about before, and how are we picking an arbitrary number to decide what's good enough to have played for your team?
Hey, Justin, what did you say again about these student athletes don't even need to play? They can be on the bench and that will still count.
Yep. So the current, and again, anyone has questions, please ask. I don't want to bring my opinion in. This is a committee decision. So I'm here to answer questions. Ultimately, what you guys decide on is what we'll go with. But as far as the question, Ty, what the wording currently in other sports, ice hockey being the team sport that I would say is the most comparable, is that the athlete would need, and I'll read it again, on the roster, in uniform, on the bench. What it says in hockey is for all 3 periods. What it would say for soccer would be for both halves. And so essentially it's the reason why the hockey proposal came through and was passed several years. This has been probably 8-9 years they've had this in hockey, is because of the club influence, kids coming in for the postseason, and then coaches for all the reasons that are being discussed here. But they didn't want to punish a kid who is at every practice, at every game, just on the bench. So that kid would get the opportunity. That game would count. It's not like you have to get into the game. I think the purpose was that you've shown the commitment to the team by being there and being on the bench for those games. And so that if you're on the bench in uniform, you just don't play, that still counts as a game for you.
Justin, then why does it say and have not participated at any level of club soccer?
That's for the JV piece. So as I mentioned, this does not, if you play MLS Next and you meet the game requirement, you can play. The JV piece is that, so coaches said, we have these kids that play JV only. And as many of you know, you don't always play a 15-game JV schedule. So let's just say that this committee felt like the number should be 10 games, or just bring up a number, 10 games as the minimum. Well, you say, Justin, how is this guy supposed to get 10? We only play 8 JV games. He can't get to 10. And so what the hockey coaches, the committee did was say, okay, if you play 65%, because that was the number, that was the percent essentially of the varsity regular season games, 13 of 19, 65%. If you play 65% of the JV games, whatever that number is, and you're not a club player, then you would be eligible for the postseason. So it's basically, so that way you don't have a kid that you say, okay, this MLS Next kid, hey, you only need to play 65% of our JV games. We only play 3. We'll get you in 2. And that will satisfy the requirement. You'll play 2 JV games all year. Now you'll be eligible for the postseason. No, JV kids, if you're a JV player, you get to 65% and you don't play club soccer, then you would be eligible for the postseason. But you could play both. There's nothing that says you can't play both. You can play club hockey and CHSAA hockey. You can play club soccer and CHSAA soccer. I think what the coaches are asking for is the commitment to both teams based on the proposal.
So other
I-
wonderings I just have too are why people picked the number of 65%. And then also just to relate things to girls season, there were some girls who were chosen, which I think is really exciting to be on like national teams for different countries. And is that then punishing kids like that who get to go represent their countries and maybe only miss 7 of the games and practices, but it's like very exciting for them to go represent Guatemala or Jamaica. TJ had a Jamaican national girl and Northfield has a Guatemala national girl. And so I don't know if we have enough. To me, it seems I don't see any data that supports it besides like how coaches feel about it, which is very anecdotal. But to me, this would need a lot more research going into it before making a proposal or citing anything.
Justin, that was a point that came up from some other coaches. Like, we know that there's some things written in there already about the exceptions, but soccer does have kids in high school who do play internationally. And we feel like that would have to be something that is written in there to say, hey, if you are representing your country at any level, then that should be okay. I have a player who's in that.
And just a reminder
that
again,
boat.
and the only reason I'm saying this, Sean, is because you directed the question to me. This is not my proposal. This is from again, I'm just here to present the facts, answer any questions, but this is a league proposal. And so yeah, the opinion of the committee is what matters to me and what the committee decides. So don't feel like you have to, anyone needs to convince me. I am not deciding this. The soccer committee is making this decision.
And as far as the general feedback from some coaches, it's pretty split. There are a lot who feel like maybe this is coming from a rival coach bringing it up, saying, hey, you know what? I played against a team and a coach did this and I don't like it. There's some other teams out there who feel like it's, is it my place to tell another coach how to run their program? I don't know. Like it's pretty split among the coaches that have reached out to me. Some are saying that the requirements are pretty minimal and could be met with ease. There are some that feel like, you know what, my program benefited from. I think there was a coach who said his program benefited from a kid whose club season ended abruptly this fall and came on board with 5 games remaining in the regular season and then helped them through the playoff run. So I don't know. I kind of agree with Ronica. I think there needs to be some more data involved and maybe collecting some more ideas from everyone before we can vote on something like this. So
I think we also talked about going back to that human element of the, postseason. When you just throw these great players in, how skewed is the bracket then at that point in time?
Yeah, I would say that, I don't have any data, but there was certainly a lot of lower seeds that made some long runs this year.
So I kind of have grouped some of the conversation into 3 questions here. Number one, Veronica brought up the equity question, which is something when we put this together on the Frontier League, I was initially concerned about. I think a lot of the rules that the association has put into place in the past sometimes has put into place in the past has sometimes affected smaller and less resource schools in a way that perhaps wasn't intended. Caused for a lot of work on behalf of the athletic directors and kids not quite understanding how to get around those rules or get qualified for those rules. And so I would also want to be sure that this hasn't led to the same thing perhaps in hockey, which is a hard thing to guess because I'm assuming hockey's a pretty expensive sport to play, not having been around it. The data question is a good one. Justin, I wonder how much, and this goes along with one of my questions in terms of how do we hold teams accountable for this? Is it a similar mechanism in the past? Is that it's a self-reporting type of violation, or is it is this creating work for you guys at CHSAA in terms of checking rosters against max preps tables, things like that? And if it was if you were able to check rosters against max preps game totals, Is that the data we're looking for? Then the third question that we brought up a couple times is just the fairness and the competitive balance between the regular season and the postseason. I think that's actually, in my mind, the easiest one to settle. Most prominent leagues have some sort of roster deadline. There's a couple of things, obviously JV players being brought up that are different for high schoolers. Injuries are obviously different. We had a couple of kids this year who transferred their 365-day transfer expired in the middle of the season. And so they got moved up at that point. So, some of those kinds of things obviously can be addressed by a waiver, but I would also concerned that would be a lot of work and perhaps arduous for CHSAA. And so those are some of the questions I had listening to that stuff.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer those?
Sure.
Yeah. So the easy one there is a 365. Remember, the kids that are given, you can still play JV. So those kids should still be getting games. So that shouldn't impact those 365 kids because they, again, can play JV and they'd be able to accumulate their game total with JV games as well.
Yeah, my concern is not the actual getting them eligible this way. It's the work that comes from submitting the waivers to you guys. It's that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So the waiver process, obviously, it's would certainly add more work for Colette and I, as it does in hockey. So yes, there would be more work there for us, but we're happy to do it if that's what the membership wants. That's what we're here for. I will say on the policing of if there were to be a minimum, like with and that's what I tell people all the time, how's it going to be policed? How's it going to be policed? Every single bylaw we have in CHSAA is self-policed. Mm-hmm. You're trusting the school across from you on the bench that they've checked grades. I'm not going into everyone's transcript. I'm not going into every school's IC and okay, is this kid eligible? Is this kid? Every single thing that we do is self-governing and is self-policing. And so there's an integrity piece with every aspect of CHSAA. And it would be no different here. And so coaches there would be a game minimum. I will say that the soccer community, like every community we have here, is very small. And people will report, will be very quick to bring up a kid that potentially didn't meet that minimum, that may have been out there for a game. And so when you put that player out there, you are saying that you are the school, the administrator, the coach is verifying that player, he or she, has met that requirement, and the schools would be responsible for upholding any rule that required a minimum game number, just like you're required to uphold every single one of our bylaws every single day throughout the school year. So everything that we do is self-policing, and this would be no different. But yes, there would be a waiver process, and that waiver process would obviously be for, like I mentioned, injuries, illness, unique circumstances to submit a waiver. And that would certainly add additional work for myself. And it's a lot. We have 40 hockey teams, and it's a lot of work. We have 240 soccer teams. So it'd be a lot. But again, that's what we're here for.
So speaking of self-reporting, and also then if this passed, would also need is like, what's the penalty? For instance, if players are ineligible, are they supposed to forfeit? Because I know there was one in the boys season that played an ineligible player and they got removed from the semis or something, but they didn't have to forfeit their previous games. And so I would be curious.
I don't know. That certainly was not that it's not happened in the 4 years that I've been at CHSAA, so I don't know what that
so like playing a player who's aged out.
That did not happen. I'm just saying that's not
4 games because they self-reported for ineligible players or something like that at the beginning of the season.
So any school that self-reports, obviously we don't talk about punishment. I can tell you whatever semifinal or whatever you're talking about, that's never happened. So that's just not the case. But the CHSAA bylaw around playing an ineligible would be if a school plays an ineligible, and I can't speak to any specific situations other than to tell you that the semifinal example you gave just never happened. Any school that plays an ineligible player per the bylaw would be, if you're playing an ineligible, the penalty for that would be forfeiture of the game. So that is the penalty that's just the CHSAA bylaw that says that any player deemed to be ineligible and as a participant, an ineligible participant would be forfeiture of the game.
Okay. Well, that was just something that was heard, but the point goes to, like, if people are self-reporting, How much is this going to be held to a standard would be my first question. And then my second one was, we keep relating it to hockey, which is a team sport, but I do think that hockey, one player might have a bigger impact than one player on an 11-person team. So again, when we're talking about this, like knowing how many kids this is affecting or like how many teams this is affecting is something that I would be curious about.
I think a piece from some of the coaches is they prefer high school versus club for the sanctity of the high school connection, right? And where you're not going to a tournament and you show up with as many guest players as you can have, and that totally changes your team, right? So they're depending on who you speak to, there's the idea of high school is different. Here's why we like it. Club, you can do this, and this is why we like it. So another thing to consider as we go through with that as well.
Does this happen with clubs in other sports, or is this something that's soccer specific? And if it is there a way that CHSAA can talk to club soccer representatives and talk about how it's affecting, because we still have people within the seasons who play club and do high school, like DPL, they do both. And so is that something that affects like club basketball or club volleyball? And if
club,
it's not,
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, if it's not, then I do think that's something that maybe CHSAA as a association, I don't know if it would impact anything, but this comes down to club soccer prioritizing themselves over high school and making sure that kids are restricted from playing their season.
Yeah, again, we don't. So it's the sports you mentioned, volleyball. I think you said volleyball and basketball. The club seasons don't happen during the. So I talked with both volleyball and basketball. I said, is this an issue with your sports? They said absolutely not, because the club seasons just don't happen. They just stop when those sports are happening. So I think the issue, and again, you can play club and CHSAA. This would not change that. You would absolutely still be able to play club soccer and play CHSAA soccer. I think the issues come up just the recently from the feedback that I've gotten directly is that recently MLS Next, when there was some of these club teams, those kids were just flat out were not. Those seasons were going into our season. They were not letting them play, and those kids just weren't participating for whatever reason. Recently, it seems to be that there's been an uptick in kids coming in at the end of the season, and so that's where the concern was, and that's where this proposal came from. But it wouldn't be CHSAA wouldn't be able to dictate anything to a club and tell them, because again, you can play club and play CHSAA at the same time. These kids. I don't think, and someone could correct me wrong, I don't think it's that the club's telling them that they can't. It's that they literally cannot, because they are involved with that club. And so that player has made the decision to play with that club team, because those games and those practices are happening at the same time. That's why they're not. It's not that the coach is saying, the club coach is saying, hey, we practice on Mondays, and our games are on Tuesdays, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, do not go to high school. It's that their practices and games are Monday through Sunday, and that there's literally no time for that athlete to play high school. That's why they're not. And the athletes made.
Yeah, I think that's only MLS Next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, you can do both. You can play club. You can play.
No,
club.
MLS Next doesn't that's the club that doesn't allow it, and that's
It's not that they don't allow it. There's no time for them to do both. They can't. Veronica, they can't do both because they're happening at the same time.
That's why I would like data, but I think that specifically these coaches are probably talking about MLS Next kids, not ECNL kids or the other elite club levels. And unless there's like something like, that's why I feel like it affects a small group of people. So I think that's why we would have to have data for this. If there's 240 teams and over 2,000 players, then how many of these are being affected by this rule? And it's one player on a team of 11. Are they? I just don't. That's what I would have to figure out.
Yeah, no, for sure. All I want to make clear is that nobody's telling them they can't play. They can't play because they don't have the time to do both, and they decided to play club. No one's telling them that they can't. That's the only thing. I just want to make that very clear. They're not being told they can't play. they can't play because their games are happening and practice are happening at the same time during the same season.
There are other states and some committees I sit on who have started something like this, and then they went to, you have to pick one or the other, and they regret it. So I think we have to have some sort of compromise from our high school side to allow these kids to do it.
Yeah, a lot of
But
states
those-
don't allow
those-
club play at all.
What's that?
I said there are quite a few states, Ohio being one of them, where you cannot do both.
Right,
Colorado,
and
obviously, you were
coaches-
very much welcome to do both if the
And
family
coaches
chose.
from those states regret it. They regret it.
Got it.
The more I think about the data aspect of it, which I think is an important question, the less I think that the data is going to be able to be found, if that makes sense. Like the max preps rosters, the playoff rosters are not going to give us any answers that really make sense. And Veronica, your point about the fact that it's probably a very small group of elite players, to me, that actually puts it more in favor of looking for whatever language is most appropriate, because that has even though it's one player on a team of 11, that has a huge impact for one team. It just stands out, and it does have the opportunity to really change the postseason. I do worry that, again, we're going to create a rule, and then there's going to be 50 waivers for every one kid that you keep out. So
I think what Veronica said earlier is, what is the drawback or what is the punishment? That these are all going to be determining factors. This has never affected my team. We've never gone up against a team in the playoffs or what have you, but talking to other coaches, that one or two players on a team, that's 20%, 10 to 20% of your roster is now the most elite on the field. That is a game changer for some coaches that I've talked to. That's just, man, we worked all hard. We worked all season. Whether or not that's fair, I'm not. It's a meritocracy. I understand that, but it is whether it's 1 or 2%. What Mike was saying, man, that changes the game. That could change the game, and so I get both sides.
Can I? Not really my place, but as a referee who referees both sides of it, including college, my observation is that injuries to key players are a much bigger factor in regular season and playoffs than a elite player coming in from the club system. So injuries are just part of the game. You lose your best two center midfielders or your top scoring striker or your goalkeeper through injury, that affects the playoffs way more in way more teams than someone coming in to play the postseason games. You can't plan around injuries. It's just part of the game.
Well, have we exhausted conversation on this? I think to move forward, Justin, would we need a motion to accept that language?
Yeah, so we would need, if, again, we have to come up with, if this is something that the committee wants, we have to set the numbers too. So, if the committee wants more data, if the committee is ready to move forward with some numbers, again, just however, but before there can be any proposal, there's got to be a number.
Justin,
Can
what
we
kind of
move
data
to-
would you be able to grab? Do you
What
think?
could I get? So I suppose, and this committee can tell me whatever data they want me to get, and I can attempt to get that. I would say that just hearing Veronica and just trying to think when she mentioned the data, we could send out a survey to all schools, and there's no way for us to be able to tell through Max Preps. Some schools don't have rosters of that data. It would literally be us polling the schools to say, did you have a player that came that played club, and at what point did he come onto your season? How many games did he or she play during your season? And trying to get numbers that way to give you some. Okay, we had 38 kids that came from club that that played less than 5 games during the season or whatever the number is, that would be some data that we could collect, but it would have to be obviously provided to us by the schools.
Well, in other parts we don't know is if this kid actually showed up to practice and just didn't play in the games and wasn't then he a part of the team.
We can
when
ask
they-
that question. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can ask that question too. Did you have an athlete that what percent of practice did an athlete participate in? What percent of games? We can try to collect as much.
Well, because
Um,
and then on that note, like what's the difference between a girl going to her national team practice to try to represent her country and a boy trying to make it to the pros and MLS next, which is their pathway to pro? And how are we dictating what the difference is of them being part of the team and going to practices, but missing like 7 games?
And to what Justin said earlier, the reality for almost all of these MLS Next boys, they're training 4 days a week. They're not going to be at two training sessions a week for a high school team and then just showing up to a game on the weekend. If so, they'd probably be if they're taking a Wednesday off for a MLS Next training session, they would show up to 1 day a week. But then that takes 6 days of wear and tear, which again, the MLS Next coach is going to probably say, if I was the MLS Next coach, I don't want you playing and running and working 6 days a week and just taking Sunday.
No, I agree with this. I just feel like this is a very hasty one time to look at this and make a decision that we don't know like what that trickle down effect makes. So like Regis Groff is one of those teams I know that played a kid who never made it in their regular season because you can see his stats. He never played any minutes and then he scored like 3 goals in the playoffs. And so is this rule going to affect is it going to hurt any big schools that still get their elite players to play at them, or is it going to hurt smaller schools with less resources who have that one kid who now are restricting from participating in high school, but they want to play club because they feel like this is their way to get out of, to make it. And they don't have another resource. And this is like, they got picked to play this. So I don't know if implementing a rule like this has a trickle down effect or which teams it's mostly going to affect.
So let me do a quick straw poll. If we were to, regardless of the number that Justin mentioned, if we were would people be in favor of voting on something like this today? If you could just raise your hand or put your thumb down. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of excitement around that. So then the next thing is I would say is that survey doesn't sound like it would be too bad of an idea. And so I think we could get some good information from that. And then I think the other thing would be, I mean, Justin, do you guys get like official complaints about this, or is it just,
Oh yeah, I've gotten many. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So then I wonder if it's just logging those for the next time we have this conversation. I know that that's a lot of work. But
I'd be in favor of finding out some data and then revisiting this in the not too distant future. Because if this is an issue that Justin is fielding, and there are more than just the silent minority of coaches who are sitting here going, "What the junk? What just happened in the playoffs? Who is this guy? Who is this girl?" Then that changes the whole aspect of high school soccer. And it's at the end of the day, it's a game for a high school team, not a business for really taking the unintended consequence of telling the 25 varsity people or 20 varsity people that have been working for 4 months, hey, this is not about you. It's about the superstar that's joining in us for playoffs. So I think it is worth determining how many schools this is affecting positively or negatively, and revisiting this not a year from now, but in my opinion, quicker than that to see what happens.
What I guess I would ask this committee if you all could either yourself or go back to your leagues and just maybe some questions that you would like answered in a survey, some things that we could survey some coaches on.
Yeah, I can help put together an email chain with this group and kind of source some of those questions for you, Justin.
Perfect.
I've also had the experience of thinking that there was somebody different on the field that we played earlier in the season, but then it turned out that they had just had a really good game that second time. So definitely got to check do your homework on those kinds of things before you make an accusation. So,
Like I think in the email chain that you
what's
sent
that?
out, in that email chain with the questions, Justin, if we could hear some of those complaints as to where it is, if it's a fair issue, if it's a equity issue, or how that goes, that might help shape our questions to our communities to iron out how to best represent the potential of this amendment.
Yeah, I would recommend maybe the soccer chairs in each league, the administrator who oversees soccer in each league, maybe to just kind of reach out, because I will say that again, I would say the majority of the phone calls and emails that I've gotten have been from Front Range schools. It seems to be that's where the issue is of these players. So maybe reaching out and just getting some feedback from your coaches, and then what questions that they'd like to have answered, to see, as Veronica mentioned, what, how big of an issue that this is. Because again, sometimes, I get 10 or 15 phone calls, but again, I said we have 240 schools. So maybe it's, again, this is something that we deal with questions. A proposal did come forward, because I know that it did impact the school that was in the league that brought the proposal. And so that's just kind of where it all came about from. But happy to do some additional research and provide information to this committee so that they can make a more educated decision.
Great. Any other discussion on 8.1?
So am I correct then, Mike, that it sounds like, and maybe we need to just, is there a motion to maybe make a motion of some type to table this while we collect data, and that way we can.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Could anybody offer a motion to table the Frontier League's proposals for individual game minimums to be revisited at the next soccer committee meeting?
I can make a motion to table the individual games minimum requirements for postseason eligibility until the next meeting.
Second.
Who seconded that? Was that John? John, was that you?
John
Okay.
or Josh, either one.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Justin, anything else on that?
No.
Okay.
Again, just all the feedback, and any feedback that you have, questions, anything you'd like to see on a survey, just get that to me, and we'll try to get that together as quickly as possible.
8.2, expansion of 2A postseason bracket. Justin, you mentioned a bunch of teams at the beginning. Would you mind doing those again, 3A and 2A especially? Yep,
will do. And so again, as I mentioned in the report earlier, it's great to report, but we do have an expanded 2A classification. We have expanded every classification. The number of schools continues to grow with soccer, and heading into the 24-26 cycle. We will have 58 schools at 5A for boys. This is boys, 58 boys 5A schools, 64A, 56 3A, and 53 2A. Girls will have 53 5A, 62 4A, 63 at 3A, and 60 at 2A. And so those numbers, especially at the 2A classification, are up quite a bit. And again, that's because we have new member schools coming on board. A lot of them are smaller schools. They're coming into the 2A classification. And then just the addition of new schools and schools adding programs, it expands all the classifications out. And typically the large and the smaller see the bigger impact there. And so we have a lot of schools at 2A. And so we had sent out a survey and collected some data from our 2A member schools to get their opinion. The survey went out and essentially explained to those schools that we do have an increase in the number of 2A programs starting in the next cycle. And because of that, would you be interested in an expanded postseason bracket? And the questions were, would you be interested in an expanded postseason bracket starting in the 24-26 cycle? Would you be interested in evaluating the data and expanding in the 26-28 cycle? Or do you have no interest whatsoever in expanding the 2A postseason bracket? And 74% of the nearly 40, we had 38 schools respond to that survey. 74% were in favor of expanding immediately. 15% were in favor of an evaluation process and then looking at 26, 28, and then 11% were in favor of no expansion. So 75, nearly 75%, 3/4 of the schools were in favor of the immediate expansion of the postseason bracket. And I would say that because of that, we were asking this committee to look at that and make a recommendation to move forward to Legislative Council. Again, as I mentioned, Intermountain League brought that proposal forward for an immediate expansion, and that's what we would have asked this committee to discuss.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Because it seems that 8.2 and 8.3 go together. Because if there's 62A teams right now, like my personal belief is that they should expand their postseason bracket. But then if they drop to 30 and 30 for the 1A, 2A, would we have another time to then redo the postseason bracket? Or is 1A coming from the 2A?
So Veronica, if we went to 1A, you would see an equal trickle down. So you would have fewer 5A, fewer 4A, like everyone would trickle down into 1A. Does that make sense? So you would have
so my question would be like, if then 2A dropped from 60 to 30, would the committee
they go from like 60 to like everybody would lose 10. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, they would trickle down. Okay, so it wouldn't change like the bracket by an extensive amount. They would still have between 50 to 60 people.
Correct. And any addition of a classification, that process is pretty lengthy. And so the earliest we could do it would be 26 because that has to go through.
Okay. I thought those two were connected to each other. So just in regards to 8.2, then if we have 60 teams, if you look at everyone else, they get 32 and they have 58, 68 in the 60s. So I would be in favor of that.
100% agree. It seems the same proportion with the rest of the classifications.
Yep. Now the question is going to be, we did look at some numbers. Again, and these, when I say 53 and 60, as I mentioned, a lot of these schools are new member schools. They have said that they will add programs. I've been doing this a long time. When the dust settles, I would say that the number would be probably a little bit lower, but nonetheless considerably higher than the previous cycle. So I would say you'd be looking at probably a handful of these schools, 53 boys, 60 girls. I would, just based on previous experience, a few of those we will probably not end up having exactly that number, but it'll still be a large number and much more than currently. The second point is we did go back and we looked at, and you all can do that. It's available information on the website. We looked at some of the records of schools that start getting into that. And again, this classification will expand. But as you get into with 2A, as you get into the 28, the 29, the 30, the 31, the 32 ranking, you're looking at schools that in some cases don't have any wins or one win. In fact, from 25 in the boys this past fall, what would have been seeds 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. I think we had 0 schools with a winning record in those compared to 5A. 25 through 32, every single one of those schools had a winning record. So just some data to consider as we look, I think, at expanding and what that number will look like, 24 teams or 32 teams. And remember, there's significant travel. So you would be asking a 2A school at the 2A classification in a round of 32 to go to 1. And you're looking at a school that's unbeaten and a school that has no wins. So do we want to make those schools make that travel? 2A's got quite a bit of travel. And that's the reason why, if you look at the current breakdown of, there's a couple of reasons. One is financial, but two is travel at 2A. They play a Friday, Saturday opening weekend because when we expanded from 12 to 16 after the 2019 season, so we made that expansion from 12 to 16 teams in 2A, and there was concern from West Slope and some rural small school superintendents that there would be missed class time. And so we tried to build that postseason bracket where you're playing Friday or Saturday and missing as little school time. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at a number for 2A as well. So I just want to give some background and some data on some of those.
So if we're making 2A go to 32 teams, why wouldn't we keep them at the same Wednesday, Saturday, or Saturday, Wednesday playoff schedule that 3A, 4A, 5A do?
And again, I don't think we're saying 32. I think we're looking at 24 or 32. And again, I just want to present some of that data on where we're looking at. If you're looking at a 32 team bracket and what some of those teams qualifying are going to look like.
Yeah, so
And
17
there's nothing, but to answer that question, even if it's a 24 team bracket or 32 team bracket, there's nothing to say that we couldn't still keep some format. But again, we've now added around, so at some point they're going to have to go into the week.
Yeah.
So it does look like, yeah, what Justin was saying, there was a winning team at 19 this year. Caprock Academy was 7-5, and Netherland was close at 6-8 at 24. But there are a lot of teams that had.
Yeah, the only numbers I gave was 25 through 32. 25 through 32 at 2 they were not. Yeah.
And are they at 16 now or at 24?
16. They're at 16.
Yeah, but we're also talking about adding teams to this, right? Or there are
Yes,
teams
there will be an
added,
addition.
so, like,
Yes, there will be an
you
addition.
can look at the old data and say there wasn't. But so, like, I didn't take into consideration the money and the travel for it. So maybe 24. Can these like be changed throughout? This would just be a 2-year cycle, or
yeah. Just for we're talking about the 24-26 cycle. Yes. So you could look at if with these new teams coming on board and the committee felt like let's start with 24, there certainly could be data with those 24 schools. And then there could be a need for adding, or the committee could feel like they want to go right to 32 now. That's for you all to
the
decide.
only part that I felt like you just said earlier that you have 60 teams that are supposed to be 2A or something like that, but a lot of them, maybe some of them won't. So then it drops back, or 56, or so. Like, what's the actual number you think will be in 2A? Or you can't say.
Or I hate to. I don't want to give you an exact number. I will just say it'd be very shocking to me if when the 24-26 cycle starts in the fall and the spring that we had 53 and 60. But I'd be hesitant to tell you what I thought.
Well,
I
even
just
if
know that we always have teams that say they're going to have programs, typically the smaller, and then numbers, when the tryouts happen or whatever, and they go, oh, we only have 10 girls or 10 boys that came out, then the numbers tend to go down.
But if we moved it
You
to
don't see as much
24,
with larger schools.
if we moved it to 24 and 12 of those, a 20% dropout, and they end at 48, we're still above the 50% playoff ratio. We're still well within the 3A, 5A, 4A of those who are in it and those who go. I mean, if you have 32 teams and 50 teams in 5A or 52 teams in 5A, that's above 50%. So even and I understand the level of parity at 25 or 20 through 24 at 2A might be pretty poor, but I don't know if it's any different than for those schools. I could be wrong. I could be totally speaking ignorantly, but if you ask a team that's 7 and 8 in 2A, would you rather have to drive 3 hours to play a playoff game or not be in the playoffs? How many of those would say, I'd rather be in the playoffs?
Playoffs are a big thing for schools. Absolutely.
Playoffs are a big thing. So I think 32 might be too big of a jump knowing that, but moving it to 24, knowing that if 20% fall out and we're at 48 schools for 2A in our state, I think that probably would be a good representation. It's my thought.
Justin, would the first weekend then be whatever that is, 13 through 24 playing each other? And then
if there was a 24 team bracket, it would be 9 against 24, 10 against 23, and then 1 to 8 would have a bye.
Would they play Friday, Saturday again?
That I couldn't tell you that right now. There's a lot of things. Those you might know, there is a current proposal coming forward from the Tournament Playoff Finance Committee about reimbursements. I think that will have a big impact. So as you know, just some background into why I mentioned a financial piece into why we do that Friday, Saturday opening weekend for 2A. So the way TNPF, the Tournament Playoff Finance Committee, is written out, when you bring in a multi-team format, essentially like playoff, when you've got multiple teams at one location that one school is hosting, the reimbursements now change. And so we went to that format is because and I'll just give you a real world example. School A played School B. When School B traveled to School A, the distance was such that the reimbursement was like $2,500. And so for a 2A school who doesn't have many people coming to a game to get ticket revenue, having to pay that amount of money to host one playoff game is unrealistic. And so we went to that multi-team structure, so that now when you have multiple teams coming to one location, it completely changes the way reimbursements were done, and no individual 2A school was going to get strapped with a large reimbursement to another school. And so that's why the 2A went to that format. If tournament playoff finance goes away from those reimbursements, we can now reevaluate the way we're doing the postseason. I will say that I've gotten many 2A schools that have reached out to me that would prefer there to be days in between, but that's going to take some data collection on my part to speak with superintendents, to speak with schools, to get their take. Do you prefer to play on a Wednesday and a Saturday and maybe have some additional travel and some additional missed class time? Or would you prefer to play on a Friday, Saturday with not as much missed class time, with not as much travel potentially? And that's just some data that I will collect. And then based on that data, we will make a decision on 2A on how that playoff bracket will be structured. But that'll be a conversation that I will have with 2A. And it'll probably happen once the tournament playoff finance committee, if that proposal is passed or not.
Yeah, because just thinking about it, that would be a pretty significant competitive disadvantage if, say, number one was hosting 9 and 24, because 9 and 24 would play one night, and then they'd have to play the number one seed off.
Correct.
Off
Yes.
a rest.
So based on if we go to 24 or 32, or keep it at 16, and then based on the way on that tournament playoff finance committee report, how that plays out, anybody at 2A that's watching know, after this committee determines how soccer wants to move forward, we will look at how tournament playoff finance moves forward. And at that point, I will bring 2A back to the table, whether it's a Zoom or some surveys, and we will discuss how that structure will look like for that bracket. And just keep in mind, somebody did ask the question, 2A, would it lengthen the postseason? No, we would still finish the 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A state final would all be together. There would be no lengthening of the 2A bracket. It would just be an additional date that would have to be sandwiched in to that already established time frame.
So I don't think there's any 2A schools represented. We have some 2A schools in our league. So I'm just wondering if
Cyrus will be a 2A. Cyrus at will be a 20
okay.
426 2A school.
Okay, that's good, because I was worried about making a decision for another division and then what kind of questions they may have in terms of what their next steps would be to kind of make adjustments to that decision. So I don't know if Cyrus, do you have any?
Cyrus is representing 2A. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of voiced my opinion. We are for our program. We were with the reclassification. Our AD made the decision, and we're going to be in 2A. So having teams that are having a bigger playoff pool, I think, just benefits a lot. Like I said, even if you have the 20 through 24, getting the boys excited, getting the boys or girls, getting them excited for playoffs. It's just, even if you go and travel, look, we traveled in a second round game, 5 hours. It was a 5 p.m. game on a school night. And was it ideal? No, not at all. To decide, hey, let's, what would be fun? Get home at 1 a.m. But the whole a team building event, even if we would have lost, it's a team building event. So even if you have playoff, I'm trying not to be naive, but there's teams that go into a playoff game knowing they're going to lose. If a coach he or she can make a decision of, we're going to go, let's get ready for the playoffs. We're going to make playoff shirts. We're going to go, we're going to travel. We're going to make a day of it, go do a team dinner, have a team event. That's a win situation. And so I would really think it'd be good for all of 2A, even if we decided not to go to 2A, to add 8 more teams, just adds a whole nother level of excitement. I know the cost, I know all of that, but everything comes at a cost.
Great. And then Justin, so just so that we know the process from here on, this is, if we voted on this, it would then go into the committee report. We would present it at the legislative council. would membership have a chance to then vote on this issue, or they vote on the whole committee report as it
Yep.
is?
So yeah, let's go through how this should work out. So first, Mike, you'll need to determine with this committee if they want to expand, and if it's 24 or 32,
Mhm.
and then we will, depending on if it's 24 or 32, you will ask for a motion and then a vote to see if this committee would like to move that forward. From that point, I will need to take this per the bylaws. Any expansion of a postseason bracket must go through the board of directors.
Got
So
it.
then I will present this to the board of directors, and then at which point it will go into the soccer committee report, and then to be voted on by the legislative council. The membership will then vote to approve this report with an expanded two-way bracket. So this committee is just recommending it to the board of directors, which I will present to them, and then if the board of directors, and I will take all the data that I have, if the board of directors moves it forward, it would then be voted on by legislative council.
All right. It sounded like let's do a quick straw poll for 24 over 32. So are folks comfortable with the 24 number? Great. Then does anybody have a motion to recommend expanding the two-way postseason brackets to 24 teams?
I'll move to make a motion that we expand the playoff teams to 24 for 2A.
I would second that.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Second vote. All opposed? Justin, I don't know how you're counting. I think we're at 5. Do I count?
Yeah, I don't see anybody opposed. Is there anyone
no
opposed?
No opposed.
Okay. All right, perfect.
Great. Thank you, guys. All right, moving on to 8.3, discussion on the addition of 1A soccer. Justin, do you want to lead this off with how that would work?
Yep, and essentially, I really want to get the take of this committee now, because as I mentioned, adding a classification is a pretty lengthy process. So I'd like to get ahead of it. And I've mentioned the number of schools that we have. I would say that I have gotten some feedback from some 2A schools now that we have so many schools now in the 2A classification, and just in soccer in general. You know, we like to have it's not always going to be 100% even, but we like to have a fairly even distribution of teams in each classification. The enrollment count from for 2A now is like 1 to like 400, which has gone up in the previous cycle. So in this current cycle, 22-24, it was like 1 to 380. Now it's like 1 to 430-ish. So it's gone up. So that you have some 2A schools that are saying, well, hey, we're a school of 100 kids, or we're a school of 150 kids. You know, as we look to start expanding soccer and it grows, that enrollment gap increases. And so I've heard that, and I just want to get this committee's take and see if we need to start doing some extra work, sending out some surveys, feeling out people's, opinions on adding 1A. Does any of this one in this committee have an opinion on adding a 1A classification? It would obviously, as I explained earlier, you would see that sort of gradual decrease in each classification. So, as an example, 5A has 58 schools on the boys' side. You'd probably see more like 50. Right. And then some of those schools would trickle down into 4A, and then a lot of 4A schools would trickle down to 3A, and 3A would trickle down to 2A. And then, 2A would become 1A. So now all of a sudden you'd have, instead of 50 or about 55 schools average in each classification, you'd probably have closer to 45 schools in each classification. And so that's kind of how the breakdown would be. And then we would, at that point, the committee would decide, how do we want to make, the playoffs look? Similar number of schools, do we reduce it now that we have smaller classifications? But that's just, again, just a discussion that I'd like this committee to have, because if I were to get the ball rolling on adding a classification, it does take several years.
If there's an additional classification, Justin, do other teams get the opportunity, or programs get the opportunity to choose to stay? How does that work?
Yeah, so the way classification, the way
classification, we would probably go down, and we wouldn't want that.
Potentially, but
Okay.
Schools are always given the opportunity to request up. And so the way the current classification system is that basically we come up with you try to have it, as I mentioned, an even distribution of teams in each classification. It's not always going to be 100% even. You assign the schools into that classification, and then schools can request to play up, or they can make a request to play down. And then there is a clock committee that hears those appeals to go down and go up. If you request to go up, it's going to be approved. And then the schools that request to go down would come in front of clock and then give their case on why they should be placed into a lower classification. But if a school, and many do, prefer to play up a classification, they're more than welcome to make that request and do that.
And then my second question would be, if a new classification comes in, does this rewrite leagues and all that kind of stuff? Is that what takes forever or for a long time?
No, I don't think so. You're seeing a lot, the way school enrollments these days are very fluid. So you're seeing a lot of changes. And so you're seeing more mixed classification, multi-classification leagues now, where you're seeing, 5A and 4A or 4A and 3A or 3A and 2A. It's very, very common now, whereas before schools were all just sort of in the same classification. Now you're seeing where, your league is an example, Metro League, where you'll have multiple, 2A schools. Manual is being a 2A school. I believe there's a couple others that'll be moving into 2A as well in this next cycle. So mixed classification leagues, it wouldn't change. And I had a text recently from an administrator that asked, is there a punishment for playing a school in a lower classification in soccer? And the answer is no.
Thanks.
And sometimes it's a benefit. I can tell you right now, 4A schools played Colorado Academy, just to use as an example, as a team that's in the state final, it would be a benefit to them. I can promise you that playing an undefeated 3A school is a good thing for a 4A school, even 5A school. There's no classification modifier for playing different. I always tell coaches, play the best teams you can find. Don't worry about what class they're in. So what is this committee? Does this committee have any opinion? Does thoughts on? You got any feedback?
I have a little bit of feedback, just that there's always going to be some unintended schools that land in classifications that they maybe don't want to be in. Not the Colorado Academy of moving down, but being put up in a division that they maybe don't want. So that was at least my learnings from the basketball expansion. So it's not really easy to predict, and probably not something that we need to super worry about. But it would probably happen. But those schools then stay in their leagues, and those leagues become multi-classification leagues. And so that just kind of makes it a little more difficult for the leagues to kind of organize things.
Yeah, my question would be, it goes to playoffs when teams become multi-layer leagues, how many, if they would still get their automatic bids, it would depend on if they kept the 3 that they need. And then my other question would be, for programs like basketball that have done this, what is the feedback around how they have felt this has changed or not changed their systems?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, no. Yeah or yes, you would still get the qualifier if you have the way soccer structured. You have the three schools. As long as you have 3 schools in a league in a particular classification, you would get that auto qualifier. No change there. And I couldn't answer the question on basketball, but I could, if that's the question that you want answered, we could certainly try to get that information.
Yeah, I just don't know what people have. I would like to see from someone who's done it what their pros and deltas were of it. And I wasn't asking if they would still have it. I was just agreeing with Mike that a team that has had traditionally like an automatic bid might lose their automatic bid with the shuffle, is all I was saying, is that it could happen.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely a possibility. Yes. Would it be beneficial to try to put, and we'd be using obviously enrollment numbers that would be, very far off from the 26-28 cycle, but would it be beneficial at some point to maybe put just like an example, a draft of what 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A would look like, so that schools could see that? Again, it wouldn't be you know, it wouldn't be 100% accurate because enrollment numbers, as I mentioned, do change quite a bit. And so if somebody were to gain a lot or lose quite a few, that could impact. But based on current numbers, I could try to put something together to kind of show committee and show the membership what that would look like if we did have 5 classifications. I could even try to put together like what a postseason would look like for them too, dates and stuff like that. That way the officials could give some input as well, because that would add number of games, and obviously we don't have an endless supply of officials, so could get that as well to them.
Justin, do you also have data on how many soccer programs we've added per year over the past 6 to 8 years? So we can project maybe how many new teams we might see by the time we get to the 26-28 cycle?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and I guess saying on the same similar lines, what problem does this solve? That would be the question I would be asking. What are the issues that would necessitate going from 2A, 3A, 4A, 5A and having a 1A? And I think adding or seeing something here would take the ambiguity of what would this look like and what would be the fallout from the 4A, 5A, all of them. So those would be my 2 thoughts.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
is
think-
the purpose because 5A has such a spectrum of like really large schools and then some that barely make the cutoff? Is this what this is alleviating? And then the same with like 2A?
Yeah, I think from what I've heard as we've expanded in other sports is that, you've got sometimes schools, it would kind of, the fewer schools, you get more like schools in each classification, I guess is the best way to put it. And so instead of those big enrollment gaps, or maybe you've got, a 2A school now that's like, hey, there's nowhere we can't, if I'm a 2A school, I can't request to play down because there is nowhere to go down. And obviously as a 1A, there would be nowhere to go down from there, but at least those 2A schools now that feel like, hey, we're in this classification, the enrollment gap's increasing because we keep adding schools into soccer and I can't request to go down. Now that you bring in 1A, that gives me a place to go and maybe play with more like schools in that classification. So that's kind of the goal would be to get, the bigger the classification numbers are, the more difficult it is to get everybody to have that parity. Whereas if you were to have smaller classifications, the hope, it's not always the case, but the hope would be that you could create more parity in smaller numbered classifications. But as you said, it's not a perfect system. It doesn't always work that way. But that would be the goal.
Justin, I thought the exercise of like, here's the enrollment numbers would be, this is how many current teams would be in those 5 brackets, and then maybe a survey that goes along with that to schools sounds like a good idea, just to see if 1A schools want it, if 2A schools want it, if 5A schools want it. Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea. I worry people then think it's already a done deal, but I think there's no getting around that.
Oh, no. If you remember, those of you who've been on the committee before or followed it, there was a push from some schools similar to the push we're getting now, a small number of schools
2A.
coming forward and saying, could we add, remember 7-man soccer? We brought that up to the committee and we sent the survey out and overwhelmingly no. So we're just trying, I just want to get some feedback, some ideas, some questions, what this committee would like to see with that data, so that we can present something to the membership if they have an appetite for 1A, because again, it's a long process and I just don't want to, I want to do it now so that we could look at it for 26, 28, as opposed to waiting maybe a year and now it gets pushed to 28, 30. So if there is an appetite for 1A, I'd like to find that out now so we can get that ball moving.
And then the other thing that survey may be able to find out is geographic concerns. And so I would worry, the biggest worry I would have is stranding some school without competition, maybe on the Western Slope or in the mountain regions.
Yep. Perfect. Okay, I will try to get, this will be probably something that'll happen throughout this school year, but I'll try to get something, try to put some information, try to put some examples on what 1A through 5A would look like. I'll try to put some surveys questions together. And then that way I can show this committee, and then we can hopefully get that out and start getting that information and the ball rolling as we head into the next school year to get looking forward to 26-28 cycles. So good feedback, and I will definitely get some info out to this group. All right, Mike, did we want to move into the overtime in data?
Yeah, let's move on. 8.4.
I just can't wait to take all this stuff to our data guy, Ryan Casey.
Yeah,
We're getting a full plate for him. I can't wait to walk into his office when we're done. Yeah, he's going to love me.
One of the
Okay,
data,
Here's 4 new surveys, Ryan. Go for it.
one
Go
of the
ahead,
data
Veronica,
I started doing, which I think would be interesting, where coaches are concerned about it, is not how many overtime games had like stayed a tie, but like how much did it affect your RPI? So what you would do is look at the last year's, not this year's cycle, but last year when we had overtime, and calculate their RPI with the ties, and then calculate their RPIs with their wins and losses, and see if it came out the same. And then that would be your solidification that changing it to overtime doesn't truly affect the RPI that much, or wherever they ended up in the rankings. And then also just to go back and see how many, it was like 3%, I think, from the minutes last year or something like that, of games actually go to overtime. And then of those games, 40% of them still ended in a tie, something like that.
Yeah. The difficult thing there, Veronica, is going to be, you're now asking us to predict games. So
No, you'd go back to
so
you go back to previous years. So you'd go back to the cycles of previous years when we did have the wins and losses after overtime, and you would calculate their RPI. You compare the RPI of how they ended, and then you would change all of those just to ties and recalculate the RPI, and if that really changed person's score or not.
Okay. The difficult thing there is going to be that when people record games in max preps that go into overtime where there's a winner, they sometimes don't put overtime. You see what I'm saying? So they'll go and put the game in as 3-2, and it doesn't say overtime, even though it went to overtime. And so we'd have to go back to the previous years, and some of those games, like that would have ended in a tie this year, we won't even know if they were in overtime or not, because people aren't putting that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, hopefully that would be like an anomaly, and there'd be like a confidence error of your data.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. The issue is there will be it won't be 100% accurate, because oftentimes I see a lot of schools, when they go put the score, they just put the final in of what the score was.
Yeah.
They don't put like 1 goal in the first half, 1 goal in the second half for both teams, and then 1 in overtime. That's the biggest thing that I was seeing when we went and looked at this data last year. But we can certainly try to put something together that does the best that we can on that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, one of their ideas was logging all those minutes and adding all the time and the impact and all of that for the players, eliminating that to help with that, as well as the refs. Ken said something at the beginning of this meeting that maybe there is a bigger issue with injuries that affects teams in playoffs than the MLS Next player who might come and drop in for playoffs. I wonder how, it's really, I don't know if you can get data or improve it, but if you have 3, 4, 5 playoff or games in a year that go to overtime and adding in 2 10-minute periods, how much more is that going to affect the injury and the wear and tear on 15 to 17-year-old-ish boys and girls, that they're not built for all of that for 5 months. So wasn't that the concern for overtime to begin with?
Yeah, it was part of it. There's obviously several concerns that went in. It was officials was part of it. Wear and tear on players, wear and tear on officials. It was the officials that are working multiple games, that when they have an overtime game that they can't predict, and being late to show up to next game. And that was also part of the reasoning. And so and then part of it was just that, as we know, at every level of soccer in a regular season, there is no overtime. And then so the NCAA, it's gotten rid of overtime. Ties are part of the game. And so all of those factors went into, I think, the decision to eliminate overtime in the regular season. But we can certainly try to get some data on how those would. I could talk to Ryan and see what he thinks, but we could certainly go and try to look at last year where we had overtime and count all those overtime games as ties and see what the RPI would have been. We'll do as best we can there because it's going to be tough because not all the games that actually went to overtime.
Yeah, I don't know how realistic maybe it is getting that info, but I understand ties can help or negatively affect, but that is the integrity of the game. That is the game.
Justin, I would imagine it would just squish the RPI so that there's nobody who's got like a 800 RPI anymore. They're all at 680 something. And the lower teams are obviously, if they're getting ties instead of losses, they're coming up a little bit. So I don't know what the mathematical measure would be. Maybe Ryan would know that, but I would imagine you're just going to report that the RPI is a little bit more squished.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly schools that maybe lost quite a few games in overtime would benefit from it.
Yeah.
If you're a team that went to overtime and just got lucky and won a lot, impact you a little negatively, probably.
Yeah.
But we can look at it. We can see what we can pull up.
And I guess what is the question that we're asking with that, right? Is it a less faithful measure? Is that what we're asking? Is whether RPI is just not describing teams accurately as they were?
Yeah, see, I the feedback we got was that again, ties were just part of the game, and so the question to me is, I mean, there would be some slight. I really don't think it's going to be dramatic. There is going to be a slight change in how RPI is weighed, but I think again, a lot of the reason that went in behind the elimination overtime is because ties are part of soccer. There is no overtime at any level anywhere in the world with a regular season game other than high school United States. And so that was part of the reason why they went away from it. And so I would say that we might see some differences in the RPI, but again, regular season ties that's just part of soccer.
And I'll add that when I got that question, there wasn't really an agenda. I think people are just curious to see the difference. I didn't really get any negative feedback about not going to overtime or anything like that. I think it's just a general curiosity about what the differences might be or how things might have shifted if they did at all.
Yeah, we could try to put as much data as possible that's we can get out to schools. We'll definitely see what we can do.
Maybe we should just go back to the old MLS shootout style at the end of the regular season.
You dribble up,
Yeah,
one-on-one with the goalkeeper, sure.
Great idea.
Yep.
Anybody else have any thoughts on overtime data? I think we've only had one season of it, so I think, it seems like it's too early to really assess it. Great. I don't think we had any other additions. Justin, anything else for the good of the order?
I don't think so, other than just want to really thank this committee. This was we went a little longer than I expected, about 30 minutes over, but some great discussions, some great feedback. I thought everybody was able to kind of give their opinions and bring their league's ideas and thoughts into the meeting, which was great. And I think we're going to come out of it with collecting some data, and eventually we'll make some educated decisions. And I think soccer will be better because of it. So I thought it was a great meeting today. There's a lot of tough topics, a lot of difficult agenda items to discuss, and I thought the committee did a great job. So thank you to everybody on this call.
Yeah, I'd also like to echo that and thank everyone for their time this morning. I know we all have busy school schedules, so unless there's anything else, I think we can get back to those.
We'll just need a motion to adjourn in a second. Usually that's the quickest we get.
I'll go ahead and motion to end the meeting.
John.
I'll second that.
There we go.
All in favor? Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.